Bear cub found a crying human. Baby in the snowstorm. What Mama Bear did froze. Everyone in shock, let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The howling wind cut through the forest like a knife, whipping snow into blinding sheets that erase the boundary between earth and sky. In the remote mountain village of Pinecrest, nestled between towering peaks, the blizzard had arrived without warning, trapping everyone indoors as night fell. Everyone except little Sophia Reed, barely 11 months old, whose feeble cries were swallowed by the roaring storm. Sophia lay bundled in layers of blankets inside a wicker basket at the edge of Thornwood Forest, less than half a mile from the village. Soft flakes gathered on her woolen hat, dusting her rosy cheeks as her tiny lungs struggled against the bitter cold. The basket, partially sheltered beneath a snow-laden pine, rocked gently with each gust of wind, threatening to topple over into a growing snowdrift. In a den not far from where Sophia lay abandoned, a young bear cub named Bran stirred restlessly. His mother, a massive brown bear the villagers had named Ursa, slept deeply, her enormous body rising and falling with each breath. The cub's ears twitched as an unfamiliar sound cut through the storm's fury, something high-pitched and desperate, unlike anything he had heard before. Curious and untainted by fear, Bran nuzzled his mother's fur before slipping away from her warmth toward the den's entrance. The cub poked his head out, squinting against the onslaught of snow. The strange cry came again, weaker this time. Bran's nose lifted to the air, catching an unfamiliar scent carried on the wind. Without hesitation, he plunged into the blizzard, his small brown body nearly disappearing in the deep snow as he waded forward, driven by instinct and curiosity. Back in the village, frantic footsteps pounded through the Mason household. Eleanor. Mason clutched her chest, tears freezing on her cheeks as she burst through one door after another, calling out for baby Sophia. Her husband Nathan stood paralyzed in the doorway, staring at the empty crib where their daughter had been sleeping just 30 minutes earlier. "She's gone, Nathan. Someone took our baby." Eleanor's voice cracked as she collapsed against the wall, her body shaking with sobs. The window in the nursery stood open, snow piling on the wooden floor beneath it. Tiny footprints led from the window to the crib and back, footprints too small to belong to an adult. "It's them," Nathan whispered, his face ashen. "The Harper twins. I caught them peering through the window yesterday. They've been jealous since we adopted Sophia." He grabbed his coat from the hook, his hands trembling. "Those troubled boys took her into the storm as some cruel prank. They couldn't have gone far in this weather." Eleanor grabbed her husband's arm. "We need help, Nathan, the whole village. No one could survive in this cold for long, especially not a baby." Meanwhile, Bran had found the source of the strange cries. The bear cub approached the basket cautiously, his wet nose twitching as he circled it. The baby's whimpers had grown softer, her strength fading with each passing minute. Bran stood on his hind legs, peering over the edge of the basket at the tiny creature inside. Sophia's eyes, blue as summer sky, widened at the sight of the furry face. Her crying stopped momentarily, replaced by a curious coo. Bran tilted his head, equally fascinated. He dropped to all fours and nudged the basket with his snout, causing it to rock gently. A tiny hand emerged from the blankets, reaching toward the cub's fur. The touch was feather-light against Bran's muzzle, but it sent a jolt of connection through his small body. He huffed softly, his warm breath visible in the freezing air. The sudden crunch of heavy paws on snow broke the moment. A low, rumbling growl rolled across the small clearing as Ursa emerged from the trees, her massive form looming like a shadow through the curtain of white. The mother bear's eyes fixed on the basket, then on her cub, her powerful muscles tensing as she assessed the unfamiliar scene before her. Sophia began to cry again, this time from the shock of the bear's sudden appearance. The sound triggered something primal in Ursa, a flicker of recognition that momentarily confused her protective instincts. She approached slowly, each step deliberate, while Bran remained beside the basket, seemingly unafraid of the human child. As Ursa drew closer, her hot breath steaming in the frigid air, Sophia's cries weakened to whimpers. The storm intensified around them, burying the basket deeper in snow with each passing minute. In the village, bells began to ring as search parties formed, their voices carried away by the howling wind before they could reach the forest. Ursa now stood directly over the basket, her massive head lowered, nostrils flaring as she took in the baby's scent. Bran pawed gently at the blankets, as if trying to dig Sophia out from the accumulating snow. The baby's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, her breathing becoming shallow as hypothermia set in. What happened next would become the stuff of legend and Pinecrest for generations to come. A moment when nature defied expectation, when maternal instinct transcended the boundaries between species. Ursa's massive paw hovered over the basket, her claws catching the dim light filtering through the storm clouds. The villagers of Pinecrest knew Ursa well. She had been spotted numerous times near their hunting grounds, always keeping her distance, always watchful. Some feared her, others respected her, but all agreed she was the largest brown bear they had ever seen. Now, as she stood over baby Sophia, that immense power was terrifyingly apparent. Bran continued to nuzzle the basket, seemingly oblivious to the danger his curiosity had created. The cub's innocent persistence tugged at something deep within Ursa's consciousness. She lowered her snout to the basket's edge, her hot breath melting the snowflakes that had gathered on Sophia's blankets. The baby's eyes, heavy with cold and exhaustion, fluttered open to meet the bear's intense gaze. For 3 heartbeats, time stood still in the forest clearing. Sophia's tiny hand reached up, brushing against Ursa's whiskers with a touch so gentle it seemed impossibly fragile against the bear's wild ferocity. Ursa flinched, but didn't pull away. Instead, she nudged the basket with her nose, turning it slightly as if inspecting its contents more carefully. The wind howled harder, driving ice crystals through the air like tiny daggers. Sophia's lips had turned from blue to a worrying purple, her breathing now so shallow it was barely visible. The temperature continued to plummet as darkness descended fully upon the forest. In that critical moment, Ursa made her decision. With surprising delicacy for such a massive creature, she pushed her snout beneath the baby's bundled form and carefully lifted Sophia from the basket. The blankets fell away, exposing the infant to the bitter cold for a terrifying instant before Ursa did something remarkable. She tucked the baby against her chest, cradling her between her front paws as she settled onto her side in the snow. Bran immediately understood his mother's intention. The cub scrambled over, pressing his warm body against Sophia's other side. Together, Mother Bear and cub created a living shield against the merciless storm, their combined body heat enveloping the human child like a furry cocoon. Miles away, in a dilapidated cabin hidden deep in the forest, 13-year-old twins Elias and Oliver Harper huddled by a meager fire, their thin faces pale with fear and regret. "We've gone too far this time," Elias whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "We only meant to scare them, to make them feel what we felt when they took her." Oliver paced the cabin's creaking floor, his footsteps leaving tracks in the dust. "She was supposed to be our sister. The Masons swooped in with their money and their fancy house and stole her from us. Our parents promised we'd get a baby sister. They promised. But the storm came so suddenly, Elias continued, his voice cracking. We didn't mean to leave her there so long. We were coming right back after they discovered she was missing. Oliver stopped pacing, his young face contorted with a mixture of anger and terror. We'll be blamed for her death. They'll send us away for sure this time. We have to go back for her, Elias decided, standing suddenly. Now, before it's too late. But as the twins reached for the cabin door, it burst open, revealing the towering figure of Garrett Walsh, the village's most experienced tracker and hunter. Behind him stood 3 other men from Pinecrest, their lanterns casting eerie shadows across the snow. "Found you," Garrett growled, his weathered face grim beneath his frost-covered beard. "Where's the Mason baby? Tell us now, or I swear by all that's holy." Back in Pinecrest, Eleanor Mason had collapsed from grief and fear, sedated by the village doctor while Nathan organized search parties. The blizzard had intensified to the worst seen in decades, with snowdrifts already reaching second-story windows. The search parties moved in expanding circles from the village, but each group was forced to turn back as the conditions deteriorated beyond what any human could endure. All except one. 72-year-old Clara Whitaker had lived in Pinecrest her entire life. Known to some as a healer, to others as a witch, Clara had a connection to the forest that defied explanation. When she heard about baby Sophia's disappearance, she hadn't joined the official search parties. Instead, she had bundled herself in layers of furs and set out alone, following a path only she could see. "The old ways still remember," she muttered to herself as she trudged through snow that reached her knees. "The forest speaks to those who listen." Clara carried no lantern, needed no compass. Her gnarled hands gripped a walking stick carved with symbols no one in the village could decipher. As she walked, she hummed a tune so ancient it had no name, the melody seeming to part the snowfall around her like a cloak. Meanwhile, in their warm, den-like sanctuary, Ursa and Bran continued to shelter baby Sophia. The infant had stopped shivering, her body temperature slowly rising as she absorbed the bear's warmth. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying softly, sometimes making curious gurgling sounds as her tiny fingers clutched at Ursa's thick fur. Ursa remained vigilant, her ears constantly swiveling to detect any threat approaching through the storm. When Sophia cried, the mother bear would gently nudge her with her nose or lick her face with a tongue as large as the baby's entire head. Each time, Sophia would quiet, comforted by the strange maternal presence. Bran, for his part, seemed delighted by this new addition. The cub played peekaboo with the blankets, causing Sophia to giggle despite her precarious situation. It was as if the young bear instinctively knew this hairless cub needed special care. As the night deepened and the temperature continued to drop, Ursa made another surprising decision. With careful precision, she picked Sophia up by the back of her clothing, the way she might carry Bran by the scruff of his neck. The bear rose to her full height, towering over the snowdrifts. "This way," she seemed to tell Bran with a soft grunt. The cub understood immediately, falling into step behind his mother as she began to trudge through the deep snow, carrying Sophia gently in her powerful jaws. They moved slowly but purposefully through the forest, Ursa breaking trail with her massive body while keeping the baby elevated above the worst of the snow. Their destination, the warm cave where they had been hibernating before, Bran's curiosity had led them into the storm. Unknown to the bears, their path would soon intersect with Clara Whitaker's solitary journey through the blizzard. And what Clara would witness that night would change everything the villagers of Pinecrest thought they knew about the wild creatures that shared their mountains. In the village, a new complication had arisen. The search parties had returned with the Harper twins in tow, the boys sobbing as they confessed to taking the baby. But when they admitted they had left Sophia in a basket near Thornwood Forest hours ago, Nathan Mason's anguished howl could be heard above even the storm's fury. "She's been out there all this time?" he screamed, shaking Elias Harper so hard the boy's teeth rattled. "You left my daughter to freeze to death?" The village elder, Abraham Thorne, pulled Nathan away from the trembling boy. "Save your strength for finding her, Mason. If there's any chance she's alive, we need every able body searching." But the blizzard had become a white death now, impenetrable and merciless. The thermometer outside the village hall had dropped to 30 degrees below zero. No one said it aloud, but the same thought haunted every mind in Pinecrest. No infant could survive such conditions for more than an hour, let alone the 3 that had passed since Sophia's disappearance. No one, that is, except Clara Whitaker, who continued to forge ahead through the impossible storm, drawn by something she couldn't explain. A feeling, a whisper, a knowing that tugged her toward the heart of Thornwood Forest. "Hold on, little one," she whispered into the howling wind. "The forest has seen you. The forest will not let you perish this night." The cave Ursa called home lay hidden behind a frozen waterfall, accessible only through a narrow passage that few humans had ever discovered. Inside, the temperature remained remarkably stable, protected from the brutal winds that howled across the mountainside. The floor was lined with years of gathered pine needles, moss, and fur, a natural bedding that had been compacted into surprising softness. Ursa ducked her massive head as she entered the passage, still carrying Sophia delicately in her jaws. The baby had fallen into a dangerous sleep, her body conserving what little energy remained. Behind them, Bran scrambled to keep up, occasionally whimpering when a particularly strong gust threatened to knock his small body off balance. Once inside, Ursa moved to the back of the cave where the ambient heat from the thermal springs deep within the mountain created the warmest spot. There, she gently placed Sophia on a bed of fur, remnants of previous meals and molted winter coats, and began to methodically remove the snow-crusted outer layers of the baby's clothing with her teeth and claws, displaying a dexterity that would have astonished any human observer. The wet outer garments removed, Ursa curled her massive body around Sophia, creating a fortress of fur and warmth. Bran joined them, snuggling close to the baby, his curious eyes watching her face as color slowly returned to her pale cheeks. Sophia's breathing remained shallow, but each inhale seemed stronger than the last, her tiny body responding to the life-saving warmth. In the darkest corner of the cave, something stirred. A pair of amber eyes reflected the faint light filtering through the waterfall. Another bear cub, smaller than Bran, watched the scene with wary interest. This was Luna, Bran's sister, who had remained behind when her more adventurous brother followed their mother into the storm. Now Luna approached cautiously, sniffing the strange hairless creature that had been brought into their sanctuary. Ursa rumbled softly, an invitation for Luna to join them. The female cub needed no further encouragement, immediately pressing her warm body against Sophia's other side. Now, surrounded by bear on 3 sides, the baby began to make small movements, her fingers twitching as circulation improved. Outside the cave, Clara Whitaker had reached the place where the basket still lay, now almost completely buried in snow. She knelt, brushing away the white powder until her fingers touched wicker. Empty. But Clara didn't panic. Instead, she closed her eyes, placing both palms flat against the fresh snow. "Show me," she whispered, the words forming clouds in the freezing air. show me where she's gone." For nearly a minute, Clara remained motionless, her weathered face serene despite the storm's fury whipping around her. Then her eyes snapped open, a smile spreading across her face. "Well, I'll be," she murmured, rising stiffly to her feet. "The old stories are true, after all." With renewed purpose, Clara turned away from the basket and began walking deeper into the forest, following tracks that had already been mostly erased by the relentless snowfall. Tracks no ordinary person would have been able to detect. The wide, distinctive prints of a mother bear carrying something precious. Back in Pinecrest, chaos had erupted at the village hall. The Harper twins had been locked in the storage cellar while the adults argued about what to do next. Some, led by Nathan Mason, demanded they form larger search parties, risk be damned. Others insisted no one else should die in a futile attempt to find a baby who couldn't possibly have survived. "My daughter is alive," Nathan roared, slamming his fist on a table. "I can feel it, and I'll go alone if I have to." Eleanor Mason had emerged from her sedated state, her eyes hollow with grief, but her voice surprisingly steady. "Has anyone seen Clara?" she asked, cutting through the arguing voices. The room fell silent. Everyone knew Clara Whitaker's reputation, her uncanny ability to find lost things, her strange connection to the forest. Some called it witchcraft. Others called it the wisdom of the ancients. None could deny her effectiveness. "She left hours ago," offered Ruth Bennett, the tavern keeper's wife. "Said something about following the old ways. I tried to stop her, at her age in this storm. But you know Clara." "If anyone can find Sophia, it's Clara," Eleanor said, a flicker of hope lighting her eyes. "She delivered Sophia into this world. She'll bring her back to us." The revelation silenced the room. Few had known that Clara had been the midwife present at Sophia's birth, that she had been the first to hold the child besides Eleanor herself. The connection added another layer to the unfolding drama, one that some found reassuring, others unsettling. In a different part of the forest, another drama was unfolding. Garrett Walsh and his hunting party had become hopelessly lost in the blizzard after leaving the Harper twins' cabin. The landmarks Garrett had relied on for decades were obscured by walls of white, and the bitter cold had begun to affect his thinking. "We need shelter," shouted Samuel Rivers, the youngest of the party. "We'll die out here otherwise." Garrett wanted to argue, to push forward, but the violent shivering of his companions told him Samuel was right. They needed shelter, and soon. "There's a cave system near the eastern ridge," Garrett shouted over the wind. "If we can reach it before frostbite sets in, we might survive the night." What Garrett didn't know, couldn't know, was that he was leading his party directly toward Ursa's den. The same cave where baby Sophia now lay, gradually regaining her strength in the protective embrace of 3 bears. Miles away, a third group moved through the forest, this one not human. A pack of wolves, driven by hunger after weeks of scarce hunting, had picked up a tantalizing scent. Bear cubs. In normal circumstances, they wouldn't dare challenge a mother bear, but desperation had made them bold. The alpha male, a scarred veteran of many winters, led his pack through the storm with single-minded determination. The scent promised a feast, if they could separate the cubs from their mother. Inside the cave, Ursa's ears pricked forward. Despite the howling wind and the muffling effect of the waterfall, her acute senses had detected something approaching. She raised her massive head, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. Danger, coming from 2 directions. The mother bear faced an impossible choice: stay with the cubs and the human baby, using her body to keep them warm, or move to defend the cave entrance against the approaching threats. Either choice could mean death for the vulnerable young ones in her care. Sophia chose that moment to wake fully, her blue eyes opening to take in the strange surroundings. For a heartbeat, fear crossed her face, and Ursa prepared for the baby to cry out in terror. Instead, something remarkable happened. Sophia reached up with both hands, touching Ursa's muzzle with a gentleness that seemed impossible from one so young. Then, incredibly, she smiled. A toothless, trusting smile that transformed her entire face. Ursa blinked, something stirring deep in her consciousness. This hairless cub trusted her completely, showed no fear despite being surrounded by creatures that could end her fragile life with a single swipe of a paw. The bear rumbled softly, licking Sophia's face with maternal tenderness before making her decision. Moving carefully, Ursa repositioned Sophia deeper into the cave, where the thermal warmth was strongest. She nudged both her cubs close to the baby, their instincts telling them to stay and protect. Then, with a final look at the precious trio, Ursa moved toward the cave entrance, her massive body tensing as she prepared to face whatever threats approached her sanctuary. Outside, Clara Whitaker had spotted the frozen waterfall just as the first howls of the wolf pack echoed through the forest. She quickened her pace, her old bones protesting as she pushed through waist-deep snow. She knew what the howls meant, and she knew what might be at stake if she didn't reach the cave in time. "Hold fast," she whispered, though whether to the bears, to Sophia, or to herself, even Clara couldn't say. Help is coming. On the opposite side of the ridge, Garrett Walsh and his hunting party heard the wolves too. Exhausted and half-frozen, the men nonetheless readied their weapons. Wolves in these numbers meant only one thing. They were hunting, and whatever they were hunting might lead the desperate predators straight to the humans. "Stay close," Garrett ordered, his rifle clutched in numb fingers. "Whatever happens, we stay together." The storm continued to rage, but now new tensions charged the air as multiple paths converged on the hidden cave. Wolves driven by hunger, humans driven by survival, an old woman driven by mysterious knowledge, and standing between them all, a mother bear driven by the most powerful force in nature, the instinct to protect her young. And somehow, in the space of a single snow-blind night, that protective instinct had expanded to include a human child. As Ursa emerged onto the narrow ledge outside her cave, the full fury of the storm struck her like a physical blow. She planted her feet firmly, her claws digging into ice for stability. The waterfall had frozen into fantastic shapes, creating a glittering curtain that partially concealed the cave entrance. Through gaps in the ice, Ursa could see movement below, the shadowy forms of wolves circling, searching for a way up. Behind her, inside the cave, baby Sophia cooed softly, the sound quickly lost in the storm's howl. But to Ursa, it was as clear as a trumpet call, a reminder of the fragile life that now depended on her protection. The mother bear rose to her full height, her massive silhouette visible even through the blizzard's fury, and released a roar that shook snow from the trees and momentarily silenced even the raging wind. The wolves hesitated, their hunger momentarily overcome by primal fear. The alpha male growled low, circling back as he reassessed the situation. 7 pairs of gleaming eyes reflected in the darkness, calculating, hungry, desperate. This winter had been crueler than most, driving the pack to take risks they would normally avoid. The scent of bear cubs promised a feast that could sustain them for days, if they could overcome the mother. Clara Whitaker heard Ursa's roar and quickened her pace, her ancient bones protesting with each labored step. She knew that sound, a mother's warning, a declaration of protective fury. It confirmed what her intuition had already told her. Baby Sophia was alive, and somehow, impossibly, under the care of the forest's most formidable guardian. The old woman reached into a pouch at her waist, withdrawing a handful of powder that glittered strangely in the dim light. Generations of mountain knowledge, passed down through her family line, had taught Clara things the other villagers had forgotten or never known. She cast the powder into the wind, muttering words in a language older than the settlement itself. Spirit of the forest, blind the hunters, shield the protector, guide my path. The powder dispersed, seeming to glow momentarily before disappearing into the swirling snow. Within seconds, the wolves' howls changed tenor, becoming confused, disoriented. The pack scattered temporarily, unable to maintain their coordinated approach. Inside the cave, Bran and Luna huddled closer to baby Sophia, sensing their mother's alarm. The human child had fully awakened now, her initial fearlessness giving way to hunger and discomfort. Her face scrunched up, preparing to cry, a sound that would carry through the cave and potentially draw unwanted attention. In a moment of startling intuition, Luna began to gently lick Sophia's face, the way Ursa would comfort her cubs. The unexpected sensation distracted the baby, her budding cry transforming into curious coos. Bran, not to be outdone by his sister, carefully nudged a chunk of honeycomb toward the baby, a treasure he had been saving from their last raid on a wild bee's nest before winter set in. The sticky sweetness touched Sophia's lips, and her small tongue darted out instinctively. The taste, rich, complex, unlike anything in her limited experience, widened her eyes in surprise, then delight. Her tiny hands reached for more, momentarily forgetting her discomfort. On the opposite side of the ridge, Garrett Walsh and his hunting party had heard both the wolves and Ursa's thunderous roar. Despite their exhaustion, the men's survival instincts sharpened. "That's a mother bear," Garrett whispered, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "And she's challenging something, probably those wolves we heard." Samuel Rivers, his beard now encrusted with ice, gripped his rifle tighter. "What do? We need shelter, but getting between a bear and wolves." "We circle around," Garrett decided. "There's more than one entrance to those caves. The main opening faces east, but there's a smaller passage on the north side. If we're quiet, we might slip in without either the bear or wolves noticing." What Garrett didn't realize was that his knowledge of the cave system was dangerously outdated. Years before, a rock slide had sealed the northern passage, leaving only the waterfall entrance, the very spot where Ursa now stood her ground. Back in Pinecrest Village, Nathan and Eleanor Mason had refused to give up hope. Against all advice, Nathan had assembled a small group of volunteers, men and women who couldn't bear the thought of abandoning a child to the storm, even at risk to their own lives. "We follow Clara's trail," Nathan insisted, checking the supplies in his pack one last time. "She knows these mountains better than anyone. If she thought there was hope, so do I." Eleanor, wrapped in the heaviest furs the village could provide, stood resolute beside her husband. "I'm coming too," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll feel it if the worst has happened. A mother knows." The tavern keeper, Harold Bennett, placed a heavy hand on Nathan's shoulder. "I've known Clara Whitaker for 60 years, he said gravely. "There's something strange about that woman, something that doesn't quite belong to this world. But if anyone can find your child alive in this hellish storm, it's her." The search party left through the village's western gate, following the faint impressions of Clara's snowshoes. The blizzard had begun to slacken slightly, not enough to call it relief, but enough that visibility had improved from arm's length to perhaps 20 paces ahead. A small mercy, but they would take what they could get. Unknown to any of the humans or animals converging on the cave, another presence moved through the forest that night. A mountain lion, rare in these parts, had been driven down from the higher elevations by the same brutal weather that had made the wolves so desperate. The massive cat padded silently through the snow, its keen senses picking up the commotion near the waterfall. Unlike the wolves, the mountain lion hunted alone and preferred stealth to direct confrontation. It circled wide, sensing opportunity in the chaos unfolding between bear and wolves. Perhaps, in the confusion, it could snatch one of the bear cubs it could smell inside the cave. The scent of the human baby registered too, but the mountain lion had no frame of reference for this strange smell, only that it was small, vulnerable, and potentially an easy meal. At the cave entrance, Ursa had descended partway down the frozen cascade, placing herself directly in the wolves' path. The alpha had regrouped his pack, and they now approached from multiple angles, looking for weakness. Their strategy was clear: exhaust the mother bear, force her to defend too many directions at once, and eventually create an opening to reach the cubs inside. What happened next would later be described by Clara Whitaker as the moment the forest itself took sides. A deafening crack split the night as a massive section of ice and snow broke free from the mountainside above the cave. The avalanche was small by mountain standards, but perfectly timed and placed. It swept down directly into the wolves' position, scattering the pack and burying two of the smaller members completely. The alpha howled in confusion and rage, backing away as he reassessed yet again. The odds had shifted against him, and the promise of food no longer outweighed the growing cost. With a final snarl in Ursa's direction, he led the remaining wolves in retreat, disappearing into the swirling snow as quickly as they had come. Ursa remained vigilant, her senses telling her that one threat had passed, but others remained. She could smell the mountain lion circling, biding its time. And now a new scent reached her sensitive nose: humans approaching from two different directions. Inside the cave, Sophia had managed to consume a surprising amount of honeycomb, the natural sugar giving her small body a much-needed energy boost. Her cheeks had regained their healthy pink color, and she babbled happily at the two cubs who continued to snuggle against her. The thermal warmth of the cave, combined with the bear's body heat, had created a pocket of survival in the midst of a killing storm. Clara Whitaker was the first human to reach the base of the frozen waterfall. Decades of knowledge told her to approach cautiously. A mother bear protecting her young was the most dangerous creature in these mountains. But Clara had one advantage the others did not: understanding. She stopped at a respectful distance, making no attempt to hide her presence. Then, setting down her walking stick, Clara did something that would have horrified any hunter or trapper in Pinecrest. She sat down in the snow, cross-legged, exposed and vulnerable, and began to sing. The melody was ancient, wordless, rising and falling like the mountains themselves. It carried clearly, despite the storm, a song that spoke of mothers and children, of protection and sacrifice, of the bond that transcends species and time itself. Ursa's reaction was immediate. Her aggressive posture softened slightly, her massive head tilting as she listened. The song awakened something deep in her consciousness, a recognition of shared purpose with this strange, frail human female. "I know you have her," Clara called when she finished her song. "I know you're protecting her. I've come to help, not to take her from you." Incredibly, Ursa seemed to understand, if not the words, then the intention behind them. The bear sniffed the air thoroughly, assessing Clara's scent, detecting no weapons, no threat, only the familiar smell of the baby inside, suggesting this human was somehow connected to the hairless cub under her protection. Above them, perched in the shadows of a rocky outcrop, the mountain lion watched this strange interaction with predatory patience. The old human posed no threat, but the momentary distraction it provided might create the opening the big cat needed. It gathered its powerful muscles, preparing to launch itself past the bear while her attention was divided. At that precise moment, Garrett Walsh and his hunting party emerged from the forest less than 50 yards away. Exhausted and half-frozen, they stumbled to a halt at the astonishing tableau before them, an enormous mother bear standing guard above a frozen waterfall, an old woman sitting calmly in the snow beneath her, seemingly in some kind of communication with the massive predator. "Clara!" Samuel Rivers gasped in disbelief. "What, in God's name?" The sudden voices startled the mountain lion into action. It launched from its hiding place in a blur of tawny fur, aiming to dart past Ursa into the cave entrance while the bear was distracted. Ursa pivoted with shocking speed for a creature her size, one massive paw swinging in an arc that connected solidly with the mountain lion mid-leap. The impact sent the cat tumbling down the ice-slick rocks, yowling in pain and surprise. But the mountain lion was not so easily deterred. It regained its footing and prepared for another attempt, this one more desperate, more dangerous. Garrett raised his rifle instinctively, years of hunting taking over. "I've got a shot at the cat," he called out, squinting down the barrel. "No," Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "Lower your weapon. You'll agitate the bear." Too late. The sound of human voices, the presence of so many potential threats, and the mountain lion's continued aggression pushed Ursa past her tolerance. The mother bear reared up to her full height, nearly 10 feet of muscle, claw, and protective fury, and released a roar so powerful it dislodged more snow from the trees. Inside the cave, baby Sophia began to cry, her wails echoing through the chamber and out into the night. The sound froze everyone in place, bear, mountain lion, and humans alike. It was a human baby's cry, unmistakable even to those who had never had children, and it was coming from inside the bear's den. "Sweet mercy," breathed Samuel Rivers. "Is that—" Clara seized the moment of stunned silence. "Nathan and Eleanor's child lives," she called to the hunters. "The bear has been protecting her. Lower your weapons if you want any of us to leave this mountain alive." The mountain lion, sensing the standoff and unwilling to face both an enraged mother bear and armed humans, slunk backward, still snarling but retreating into the shadows. One avenue of threat had diminished, at least temporarily. Garrett slowly lowered his rifle, his weathered face a mask of disbelief. "Clara, are you saying that bear rescued the Mason baby?" Before Clara could answer, new voices called from the forest's edge. Nathan and Eleanor Mason emerged with their small search party, drawn by the commotion and guided by an instinct that defied rational explanation. Eleanor pushed forward through the deep snow, her mother's heart recognizing her baby's cries through all other sounds. "Sophia!" she screamed, starting toward the waterfall without regard for the massive bear guarding it. Nathan grabbed his wife's arm, holding her back. "Eleanor, wait, the bear—" What unfolded in the next moments would be told and retold in Pinecrest for generations, each retelling adding layers of wonder until the story became legend. But the core truth would remain unchanged, a truth witnessed by nearly a dozen adults who would swear to its veracity until their dying days. Ursa stood at her full height, an imposing silhouette against the ice-covered rocks, her breath steaming in great clouds as she assessed the humans gathering below. Eleanor Mason's anguished cry had stirred something primal in the mother bear, a recognition that transcended species. The woman's scent carried the same notes as the baby's, and her cries held the same desperate quality that had first drawn Ursa to protect the abandoned child. Inside the cave, Sophia's wails grew more insistent. Bran and Luna paced anxiously around her, distressed by her cries but unsure how to comfort her. The honeycomb had provided temporary distraction, but now the baby needed what only her mother could provide. Clara Whitaker slowly rose from her seated position, her old joints creaking from the cold. With deliberate movements that telegraphed no threat, she turned to face Eleanor and Nathan. "The child lives because of this bear," she called out, her voice carrying surprising strength despite her years. "What we decide in these next moments will determine whether any of us leave this mountain alive, including your daughter." Nathan's face contorted with conflicting emotions. Hope that his child lived, fear of the massive predator guarding her, and confusion about Clara's words. "What are you saying? That we should just let the bear keep our baby?" "I'm saying we must approach this with respect," Clara replied, turning back to face Ursa. "This is not a negotiation we can win with force." Eleanor, however, had stopped listening. A mother's instinct had taken over, drowning out reason and fear alike. She pulled free from Nathan's grasp and stepped forward, alone and unprotected, into the space between the armed men and the mother bear. "Please," she said simply, addressing Ursa directly as tears froze on her cheeks. "Please, I need my baby." The words meant nothing to the bear, but the tone, the raw emotion behind them, registered clearly. Ursa lowered herself to all fours, her massive head swinging between Eleanor and the cave entrance where Sophia continued to cry. The bear grumbled deep in her chest, not a growl of aggression, but a sound of indecision. Clara saw her opportunity and moved carefully to Eleanor's side. "Show her you're the mother," she whispered urgently. "She understands that bond better than anything else." Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly, then reached into her coat and withdrew a small blanket, Sophia's favorite sleeping cloth, embroidered with her name and still carrying her scent despite the hours in the bitter cold. She held it up toward Ursa, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from desperate hope. Ursa approached cautiously, each massive paw placed with deliberate care as she descended the icy slope toward the humans. The hunters tensed, fingers moving instinctively toward triggers, but Clara waved them down with sharp, authoritative gestures. When only a few feet separated them, Ursa stretched her neck forward, nostrils flaring as she took in the scent of the blanket. Her eyes, deep, intelligent, impossibly knowing, locked with Eleanor's. For a breathless moment, two mothers regarded each other across an evolutionary divide of millions of years, connected by the most fundamental bond in nature. Then, Ursa did something that defied every natural instinct of her species. She turned her back on the humans, presenting the most vulnerable position a predator can assume, and began to climb back toward the cave entrance. Halfway up, she paused and looked back, her meaning unmistakable. "Follow." "She's inviting you," Clara whispered, awe evident in her voice. "Just you, Eleanor. The rest of us will wait here." Nathan started to protest, but Clara silenced him with a raised hand. "Trust me in this, or all may be lost." With her heart pounding in her ears, Eleanor began to carefully climb the icy path Ursa had created. Her boots slipped on the frozen waterfall, but she caught herself each time, driven by a determination stronger than fear. The mother bear waited patiently, occasionally reaching back to nudge Eleanor's hand with her muzzle when a particularly treacherous section loomed. Below, the gathered villagers and hunters watched in stunned silence. Many made signs against evil, certain they were witnessing something outside the natural order. Others, including Nathan, simply prayed. To God, to fate, to whatever forces might be listening, for their loved ones' safety. At the cave entrance, Ursa paused once more, fixing Eleanor with one final, penetrating gaze before ducking inside. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before following, disappearing into the darkness after the massive predator. Inside, the cave opened into a surprisingly large chamber, dimly lit by a strange, phosphorescent fungus that grew in patches on the walls. The air was noticeably warmer, almost comfortable compared to the killing cold outside. Eleanor's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. In the center of the cave, on a bed of soft fur and dried vegetation, sat Sophia, alive, alert, and seemingly unharmed. Around her, the two bear cubs had created a protective circle, their small bodies providing warmth and companionship. Sophia looked up at her mother's entrance, her tear-streaked face breaking into a smile of pure joy and recognition. "Mama," she called, speaking her first clear word in a moment that seemed ordained by forces beyond human understanding. Eleanor rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her daughter and gathering her into a fierce embrace. Tears flowed freely as she ran her hands over Sophia, checking for injuries but finding only warmth and the sticky remnants of honeycomb around her mouth. The bear cubs backed away, retreating to their mother's side as Ursa settled herself at the edge of the chamber, watching the reunion with what could only be described as maternal satisfaction. Bran, the more adventurous cub, peeked around his mother's massive foreleg, clearly curious about the emotional display. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, looking directly at Ursa. "How can I ever thank you enough?" The words were meaningless to the bear, of course, but the gratitude behind them seemed to register. Ursa rumbled softly, a sound so gentle it seemed impossible from such a formidable creature. Eleanor wrapped Sophia securely in fresh blankets from her pack, marveling at her daughter's condition. Against all odds, against nature itself, this wild apex predator had saved her child when all human logic said Sophia should have perished hours ago in the unforgiving cold. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Sophia twisted in her arms, reaching back toward the bear cubs with a plaintive sound. Bran responded, taking a tentative step forward before Ursa gently pulled him back with one paw. The boundaries between their worlds were being re-established, the temporary miracle of interspecies care coming to its necessary end. Eleanor backed carefully toward the cave entrance, keeping her eyes on Ursa out of respect rather than fear. At the threshold, silhouetted against the night sky where the storm had finally begun to abate, she paused for one final gesture. Taking one of Sophia's small mittens from her pocket, a pair Clara had knitted before the baby's birth, she set it carefully on a rock at the cave's entrance. A token of remembrance, of connection, of gratitude too profound for words. Outside, Nathan rushed forward as Eleanor emerged with their bundled daughter. The waiting villagers erupted in cries of joy and disbelief. Sophia was passed carefully to her father, who wept openly as he held his child, warm and alive against all possibility. "How?" he kept asking through his tears. "How is this possible?" Clara Whitaker stepped forward, her weathered face solemn. "There are forces in these mountains older than our understanding," she said quietly. The bear did what her instincts told her to do, protect a vulnerable young life, regardless of its species. We would do well to learn from such wisdom. As the reunited family began their careful descent from the waterfall ledge, Garrett Walsh noticed something that stopped him cold. Standing at the cave entrance, illuminated briefly by a break in the clouds, Ursa watched them leave. Beside her stood both cubs, healthy and alert. But on her other side, barely visible in the dim light, stood another figure, one that seemed to shimmer slightly before disappearing back into the cave. "Did you see?" Garrett began, turning to Samuel Rivers. "I saw nothing," the younger man interrupted firmly. though his pale face suggested otherwise. And neither did you if you know what's good for us. Some things aren't meant for the telling. As the group made their slow way back toward Pinecrest, the storm finally broke completely, stars appearing in the clearing sky like silent witnesses to the night's miracles. Behind them, a mother bear and her cubs returned to their interrupted hibernation, the boundary between their world and the human one restored, but forever altered by what had transpired. In Pinecrest, the Harper twins awaited judgment for their reckless act. But fate, or perhaps Clara's intervention, had something unexpected in store even there. When they learned of Sophia's miraculous survival and the bear's inexplicable protection, the bitter jealousy that had driven their actions dissolved into profound remorse and wonder. The village doctor examined Sophia thoroughly upon their return, finding her not only unharmed but thriving, as if her hours in the bear's care had somehow strengthened rather than endangered her. The only visible marks were light scratches on her cheeks, not from claws or aggression, but from the rough tongues of bear cubs who had licked her face in curious affection. "A miracle," the doctor pronounced, shaking his head in disbelief. "There's simply no medical explanation for her condition. By all rights, exposure to those temperatures should have been fatal within hours." Eleanor and Nathan brought Sophia home to her crib, now positioned directly beside their bed where they could reach out and touch her throughout the night, reassuring themselves that she was truly returned to them. As Sophia drifted to sleep, she made a soft rumbling sound in her throat, an uncanny echo of Ursa's gentle grumble. Eleanor and Nathan exchanged glances but said nothing, adding it to the growing list of wonders they had no explanation for. Outside their window, the night had cleared completely, revealing a sky ablaze with stars, and from the direction of Thornwood Forest came a sound that carried clearly in the still, cold air, the distant call of a mother bear, bidding farewell to the strange, hairless cub who had, for one remarkable night, become part of her family. Spring came early to Pinecrest that year. The brutal winter that had nearly claimed Sophia's life gave way to a thaw so sudden and complete that the oldest villagers could recall nothing like it. Snowdrifts that had towered above rooftops in February had vanished by mid-March, and the first wildflowers were already dotting the forest floor before April arrived. With the changing season came a subtle shift in the village itself. The story of the mother bear who had saved baby Sophia had spread far beyond Pinecrest's boundaries, drawing curious visitors from neighboring settlements. Some came doubting, seeking to disprove what they considered a fanciful tale. None left as skeptics, not after speaking with the dozen witnesses who had seen Ursa guide Eleanor into the cave and watched them emerge with a thriving child who should have perished in the cold. The Harper twins, Elias and Oliver, had been spared the severe punishment many initially demanded. Eleanor herself had intervened on their behalf, arguing that their reckless actions had inadvertently led to something miraculous, a revelation about the natural world that none of them could have imagined possible. Instead of exile or worse, the twins had been placed under Clara Whitaker's guardianship. The old woman had taken them into her small cabin at the forest's edge, where she put them to work, learning the ancient ways she had preserved through the decades. To everyone's surprise, the boys had taken to her teachings with unexpected enthusiasm, their former bitterness replaced by a hunger to understand the deeper connections between humans and the wilderness that surrounded them. For the Mason family, life had transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. Nathan had stepped down as head of the village hunting parties, instead focusing his skills on guiding visitors safely through the forest. Eleanor had begun working alongside Clara, learning the healing properties of plants and the old woman's unique understanding of the mountain's rhythms. And Sophia, now 16 months old and taking her first wobbly steps, had developed peculiarities that both fascinated and slightly unnerved those around her. She showed no fear of wild animals, even when a fox had wandered into the village square. When upset, she sometimes made rumbling sounds in her throat that echoed Ursa's comforting grumbles. Most striking of all, she had developed a habit of seeking out the highest spot in any room, climbing furniture with surprising strength and agility for one so young, as if drawn to elevated perches where she could survey her surroundings. "She remembers," Clara had said simply when Eleanor mentioned these behaviors. "Some experiences leave imprints too deep for time to erase, especially in one so young." She carried something back with her from that cave, a piece of the wild that will always live within her. On a warm day in late April, as the forest burst with new life, Eleanor packed a small basket and dressed Sophia in her favorite blue dress. The time had come for something she had been planning since the night of the rescue: a return to the cave, not out of necessity this time, but out of gratitude and respect. Nathan had offered to accompany them, but Eleanor had gently refused. "This is between mothers," she had explained, "something neither of you would fully understand." Clara Whitaker joined them instead, her walking stick tapping a rhythm on the forest path as she led the way toward the waterfall. The old woman moved with surprising energy, as if the spring renewal had somehow seeped into her ancient bones. "Bears typically leave their winter dens by mid-April," Clara explained as they walked. "Ursa and her cubs are likely foraging in the lower valleys by now, fattening up after their long sleep." Eleanor nodded, adjusting Sophia on her hip. "I don't expect to find her there. I just need to see it again, to make peace with what happened." The frozen waterfall of that terrible night had transformed into a vibrant cascade, sunlight fracturing through the falling water to create dancing rainbows on the surrounding rocks. The narrow ledge that had seemed so treacherous in the blizzard was now clearly visible, a natural path worn by generations of wildlife seeking the hidden cave beyond. Clara waited at the base of the falls, choosing to let Eleanor make the final climb alone. "Some journeys are meant for only those directly touched by fate," she said, settling onto a sun-warmed boulder. "Sophia and I will watch from here." Eleanor hesitated, suddenly uncertain about leaving her daughter even for a few minutes. "She'll be safe with me," Clara assured her with a knowing smile. "You need this moment alone to find your closure." With a nod, Eleanor carefully passed Sophia to Clara, then began the climb up the rocky path. Though no longer icy, the route still required careful footing. She paused halfway up, looking back to see Sophia watching her intently from Clara's lap, little hands waving encouragement. The cave entrance was exactly as she remembered, a dark opening partially concealed behind the waterfall's edge. Eleanor ducked inside, momentarily blinded as her eyes adjusted from bright sunlight to dim interior. The phosphorescent fungus still glowed faintly on the walls, providing just enough light to see. The chamber appeared empty at first glance, the bears long gone as Clara had predicted. Eleanor moved to the center where Sophia had been kept warm that fateful night. The bed of fur and dried vegetation had been scattered, but traces remained, enough to confirm her memories were real and not some desperate fabrication of a mother's hope. She knelt, running her fingers over the cave floor, overwhelmed by emotion as she fully grasped how close she had come to losing everything. From her basket, she removed the items she had brought: a small carved wooden bear that Nathan had made for Sophia, a jar of the finest honey their village produced, and a letter she had written, expressing in words what she could never say aloud to those who had saved her child. As she arranged these offerings in a small hollow near the back of the cave, something caught her eye: a flash of red against the dark stone. Eleanor moved closer, her heart stuttering in her chest as she recognized what lay half-hidden in the crevice: Sophia's mitten, the one she had left as a token of gratitude. But it had been modified, wrapped carefully around something and secured with strands of bear fur. With trembling fingers, Eleanor unwrapped the mitten, gasping softly at what it contained. 3 perfect bear claws, likely shed naturally during hibernation, arranged in a circular pattern that could not have occurred by chance. Beside them lay several strands of fur from each bear: the coarse, dark hair of Ursa and the softer, lighter fur of her cubs. "A gift?" Eleanor whispered, understanding washing over her. Ursa had left her own token, a powerful symbol in bear culture, part of herself and her cubs, freely given rather than taken. Tears flowed freely as Eleanor rewrapped the precious objects in the mitten and tucked it securely in her dress pocket. She placed her offerings in the same spot, knowing with inexplicable certainty that they would eventually be found, even if months passed before the bears returned to this den. As she turned to leave, a shaft of sunlight broke through a gap in the cave ceiling, illuminating something scratched into the wall that she hadn't noticed before, markings that looked distinctly deliberate. Eleanor moved closer, tracing her fingers over the rough indentations in the stone. The marks formed a simple but unmistakable image: a large bear standing protectively over a small human figure. Below it, 4 parallel lines had been drawn: 3 bear paw prints and, stunningly, 1 tiny human handprint, too precisely formed to be accidental. Eleanor pressed her palm against the stone, a connection across species that defied everything she had been taught about the separation between human and animal worlds. "We remember too," she whispered, "and we always will." Outside, Clara looked up as Eleanor emerged from the cave, immediately noting the transformed expression on the younger woman's face. "You found something," the old woman said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded, too moved for words as she reclaimed Sophia from Clara's arms. The baby immediately reached for her mother's pocket, somehow sensing the treasure hidden there. "The worlds touched that night," Clara said softly as they began their descent. "Such moments are rare and precious. They remind us that the boundaries we create are often more imagined than real." As they reached the forest path, a sudden silence fell over the woods, the kind of hush that signals the presence of a powerful predator. Eleanor froze, instinctively clutching Sophia closer, while Clara remained perfectly calm, her eyes fixed on a ridge about 50 yards away. There, partially obscured by new spring foliage but unmistakable in her massive form, stood Ursa. Beside her, significantly larger than they had been during the winter, romped Bran and Luna, chasing each other through patches of wildflowers. The mother bear rose to her hind legs, towering above the vegetation as she tested the air with her sensitive nose. Though too distant to see clearly, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that Ursa was looking directly at them, at Sophia. Surprising both women, Sophia suddenly raised her small arms toward the distant bears, releasing a perfect imitation of a bear cub's greeting call. The sound, impossible from a human child who had spent mere hours in Ursine company, echoed through the quiet forest. After a breathless moment, Ursa responded with a gentle rumble that carried clearly to their ears. Not a warning or a threat, but a recognition, an acknowledgement of a bond that existed beyond explanation. Then, with one final look, the mother bear dropped to all fours and led her cubs away, disappearing into the lush spring forest as quietly as they had appeared. "The circle is complete," Clara murmured, tears shining in her ancient eyes. "In all my years, I never thought to witness such a thing." Eleanor could only nod, words inadequate to express the profound emotion of the moment. Sophia, however, seemed perfectly content, snuggling against her mother's shoulder with a happy sigh that somehow contained both worlds, the human one she had been born to, and the wild one that had preserved her life. As they walked back toward Pinecrest, Eleanor realized something fundamental had shifted within her. The forest that had nearly taken her daughter now felt not like a threat, but like an extension of their home, a place of wonder rather than fear, of connection rather than separation. Years later, long after Clara Whitaker had passed into legend herself, Sophia Mason would return to that cave as a young woman, guided by memories too deep for ordinary explanation. She would become a bridge between worlds, her life's work dedicated to protecting the wilderness that had once protected her. And sometimes, in the depths of winter when storms howled through Thornwood Forest, villagers would report glimpses of a woman walking fearlessly among the trees, her path sometimes crossed by bears that greeted her not as prey, but as kin. For in that one miraculous night, when a bear cub found a crying human baby in a snowstorm, something profound had awakened. A recognition that the most powerful force in nature crosses all boundaries, speaks all languages, and lives in the heart of every mother, regardless of species. The bond between protector and protected, once forged in the crucible of survival, had transformed not just a single human life, but an entire understanding of humanity's place in the wild world. And in Pinecrest, they would tell this story for generations to come, its truth undiminished by time, a reminder that in our most vulnerable moments, salvation can come from the most unexpected sources. When asked years later about the night that changed everything, Eleanor Mason would simply smile and touch the bear claw amulet she always wore against her heart. "A mother knows her child," she would say. "That night I learned that motherhood speaks a universal language, one that even the wilderness understands."